Listen to me. There's a moment in life where everything you thought you understood gets shattered in 60 seconds. Where the person you loved most looks at you with a coldness that freezes your blood. Where you realize you never really knew them at all. This is that story. On a rainy evening in March, a woman named Grace pulled out of her driveway with two newborn babies crying in the back seat. She had $72 in her purse. No job, no family nearby, no plan. Everything she owned fit into 3 suitcases stacked in the trunk. And the man who threw her out of that house, the man she had married, the man she had trusted with her entire future, he was already on his phone, checking his bank account, making sure the locks would be changed before she could come back for anything else. He'd calculated it all perfectly. He'd won. Or so he thought. But here's what he didn't know. Here's what would consume his thoughts for the rest of his life. What would wake him up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat. What would haunt him until his dying breath. There was something in that house that belonged to Grace. Something that had been waiting for her all along. Something that was signed and sealed and buried in plain sight. Something that would transform her from a desperate, broken woman sleeping in her car with 2 babies into the rightful owner of everything he believed he possessed. And when he finally understood what he'd done, when he finally realized his cruelty had handed her everything, it would be too late. The deed was in her name. It had always been in her name. And his entire world was about to collapse. Before we tell you how she discovered the truth, before we show you how the courts demolished his lies, before we reveal the final twist that changed both of their lives forever, you need to understand who these people were. You need to know what brought them together. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about love twisted into something unrecognizable. It's about how well you can hide your true nature behind a smile and a business suit. It's about how someone can systematically destroy another person while making it look like an accident of circumstance. And most importantly, it's about how sometimes, when life seems most unfair, when victory seems most impossible, the universe has a way of serving justice that you never saw coming. So who was Grace? Who was the man who threw her out? How did a marriage that started with romance end with a woman holding 2 newborn babies on a rainy night, homeless and alone? And what secret had been waiting in the documents all along? The kind of secret that makes people say, if this happened to me, I don't know what I would have done. That's the story we're telling you today. Because in the legal world, there's a saying, never assume you know who really owns what. And it's a lesson that one man learned far too late. Grace Margaret Sullivan grew up in a middle-class neighborhood just outside Philadelphia. Her father, Robert Sullivan, was a successful real estate developer and investor. He wasn't wealthy in the way you see in movies, but he was comfortable. More importantly, he was careful. He understood the value of protecting your assets. He understood the law. And he understood that the people you love can disappoint you in ways you never expect. Grace was his only daughter. He had 2 sons who followed him into business, but Grace was different. Grace wanted to help people. She wanted to teach. She majored in early childhood education and loved working with children. She was patient, kind, the kind of person who believed the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. Her father worried about her. He would tell her, "Sweetheart, the world isn't as kind as you think it is. People will take advantage of your goodness." But Grace would just laugh it off. She believed in love. She believed in second chances. She believed that if you treated people right, they would treat you right in return. This belief would shape everything that came after. Robert Sullivan made good money over the years. He invested in property. He built a portfolio. And as he got older, he started thinking about his children's futures. He wanted to make sure they were protected. He wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, they wouldn't have to worry. So in 2015, he purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom home in the suburbs for $340,000. He didn't put it in Grace's name yet. He put it in a trust. He named himself as trustee. And in his will, he specified that when Grace turned 35 or when she got married, whichever came first, the deed would transfer to her automatically. It was a brilliant legal maneuver. It would protect the property from creditors. It would keep it separate from any marriage or divorce. It was his way of saying, I love you. I will always protect you, even after I'm gone. Grace didn't know about this plan. Her father never told her. He wanted it to be a surprise, or perhaps he was worried that telling her would change how she approached relationships. He wanted her to fall in love for the right reasons, not because of what he'd given her. So the secret stayed locked in his lawyer's files. The property deed remained in the trust, waiting. Robert Sullivan died of a heart attack in July 2016. He was 58 years old. Grace was devastated. For months, she was unable to function. Her brothers helped her through the funeral, the probate process, the overwhelming grief. And then, one day, the family lawyer called her into his office. Your father left something for you, he said. And that's when Grace learned about the house. The deed was in her name. held in a trust that was now irrevocable. The house was hers, not to rent out, not as an investment, but as her home, as her security, as her father's final act of protection. She moved into that house in September 2016. It was beautiful. It had a large backyard with oak trees. It had a kitchen that her father had specifically renovated. It had everything a young woman could want. She brought in furniture. She painted the walls. She made it her own. And she thought, maybe someday, she would share this place with someone she loved. Someone who would appreciate how much this home meant to her. Someone who would treat her the way she deserved to be treated. She had no idea that someone was already watching her. That someone had already decided he wanted what she had. And that he was already planning how to take it. James Harrison was a man who understood power. He understood money. He understood how to make people feel special. He had dark hair, expensive taste in clothes, and a smile that made women feel like they were the only person in the room. He worked in commercial real estate investment. He made good money. Not exceptional money, but enough to maintain the appearance of wealth. Enough to take women to expensive restaurants. Enough to lease a luxury car. Enough to make people think he was more successful than he actually was. James had been married once, in his 20s. It ended badly. He said it was because his ex-wife was unfaithful. She said he was controlling. They reached a settlement. They moved on. But the experience changed something in James. It made him angry at the idea of losing. It made him obsessed with control. It made him understand that marriage could be used as a tool, not as a commitment, but as a transaction. In early 2017, James attended a charity fundraiser in the Philadelphia area. It was one of those events where wealthy people and semi-wealthy people gathered to feel good about themselves while donating money. Grace was there because one of her friends had convinced her to come. She was wearing a blue dress. She was standing by the silent auction table, looking at paintings, trying to appear engaged when she wasn't. That's when James saw her. He noticed her immediately, not because she was the most beautiful woman there. She wasn't. But because something about her screamed vulnerability. Something about her read as trusting. Something about her suggested that she came from money, that she had security, that she had something to protect. He made his move that night. He appeared next to her at the auction table. He made a joke about one of the paintings. She laughed. He introduced himself. He bought her a drink. He listened to her talk about her job. He asked questions about her family. And over the course of the evening, he gathered the information he needed. "Where are you from?" he asked casually. She told him about the neighborhood. "Do you live there?" he asked. She mentioned the house. "A house at your age? You must come from money," he said, making it sound like a compliment. She laughed, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to people caring about her finances. She wasn't used to being pursued by someone so focused on understanding her assets. But she interpreted his interest as genuine. She thought he was interested in her. She thought he wanted to know her better. What she didn't realize was that he was running a calculation. He was thinking, a house, probably clear or close to clear. Probably single. Probably someone who had never had anyone challenge her about her property. Probably someone who would be easy to manipulate. By the end of the night, he had her phone number. By the end of the week, they were going on dates. By the end of the month, he was staying at her house multiple nights a week. And by the end of the year, he had moved in. Grace was happy. She thought she had finally found someone who understood her, someone who wanted to build a life with her. She didn't notice that he never contributed money for the mortgage or utilities. She didn't notice that he was slowly isolating her from her friends. She didn't notice that whenever she talked about her father's legacy, he would listen very carefully, asking specific questions about the trust, about the deed, about whether anyone else had a claim to the property. She was too in love to notice these things. Too hopeful. Too willing to see the best in him. And that's the moment when everything started to change. Because James had already made his decision. He had already determined that he was going to marry Grace, have her put his name on some paperwork, and then he was going to leave her with nothing. James proposed on a beach in Mexico. It was romantic. It was perfect. He told her he couldn't imagine spending his life with anyone else. She said yes, crying happy tears. They were married 6 months later at a small ceremony. Grace wanted a big wedding, something that would honor her father's memory, something that would celebrate her joy. But James convinced her to keep it small and intimate. "I just want it to be us," he said. "I don't need the world to see our love. Our love is private. Our love is perfect." What he meant was, I don't want a lot of witnesses to what's about to happen. I don't want friends and family asking questions. I don't want anyone close to you paying attention to how I'm changing your life. The wedding was on a Saturday in June. 40 people attended. Grace's brothers stood by her side. And when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her like he meant it. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He was already thinking about the lawyer he'd hired. He was already thinking about what came next. 3 weeks after the wedding, James sat Grace down at the kitchen table. It was evening. They had just finished dinner. He had been practicing what he was going to say. I've been thinking about our future, he began. About building wealth together. About security. She nodded, interested. She thought they were about to make plans. About to start saving for a family. About to build something meaningful. I want us to combine our assets, he continued. I want to put my name on your house deed. It makes sense legally. It protects us. It shows unity. Grace hesitated. She called her lawyer. She asked if this was a good idea. Her lawyer was an older man who had worked with her father. He said, Grace, be careful. Your father set this house up specifically to protect you. If you add his name to the deed, you change the legal structure. You might lose that protection. She told James what the lawyer said. She said she wanted to wait. She said maybe they could discuss it later. James's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He was angry. He accused her of not trusting him. He said that if she really loved him, she would show it by putting his name on the deed. He said that her refusal was proof that she didn't believe in their marriage. This went on for weeks. He would bring it up constantly. He would make her feel guilty. He would tell her that she was being selfish. He would say things like, if something happened to you, I'd have nothing. Your brothers would get everything, and I'd be out on the street. Is that what you want? He made her feel ashamed for protecting her father's legacy. He made her feel like a bad wife for not trusting him completely. And through this relentless pressure, Grace started to crack. She started to doubt herself. She started to think that maybe the lawyer was being overly cautious. Maybe James was right. Maybe love meant putting his name on the deed. But she never quite crossed that line. She never added him to the house. Something inside her resisted. Some part of her, some echo of her father's voice, kept whispering that this was a mistake. So James changed tactics. He stopped pushing directly. Instead, he started making comments. I'm sorry I'm not good enough for your house, he'd say when she declined to add his name. I'm sorry I don't come from money like you. He made her feel guilty for having security. He made her feel privileged. He made her feel like she needed to apologize for her father's love. In the meantime, he was watching and waiting. He was gathering information. He discovered that in Pennsylvania, where they lived, if they had a child together while married, and if that child lived in the house, he could make claims on the property in a custody battle. He learned about spousal rights. He learned about how, in many states, even if a property is separate, if you live there as a married couple, certain rights can attach. He learned that he didn't need his name on the deed. He just needed to create a situation where she was vulnerable, where she was alone, where she couldn't fight back. And that's when he decided he wanted a baby. Or rather, that's when he told Grace he wanted a baby. He was lying about that too. Grace became pregnant in November 2018. She was overjoyed. She had always wanted to be a mother. She had always imagined reading stories to her children in the backyard of her house, under the oak trees. She imagined taking them to school, watching them grow up surrounded by stability and love. She called James with the news. She expected excitement. She expected him to be happy. Instead, his voice went cold. Are you sure? He asked. Are you absolutely sure? She was confused. They had talked about having children. They had discussed it. They had agreed it was something they wanted. But the tone of his voice suggested that something had changed. Something had shifted in him. The pregnancy was physically difficult. Grace struggled with morning sickness that lasted all day. She was tired constantly. She gained weight. She felt unattractive. And James made sure to remind her of all of this. You're getting big, he'd say, not as an observation, but as a criticism. You don't look like yourself anymore, he'd say, making her feel ashamed of her own body as it created life. He would spend long hours away from home. He would go to the gym. He would meet friends at bars. He would stay out late without explanation. When she asked where he was going, he would get angry. I can't believe you're so insecure, he'd say. I can't believe you don't trust me. She started to feel like his absence was her fault. Like her pregnancy was pushing him away. Like she was responsible for his unhappiness. This is a common pattern in relationships where one person is being systematically destroyed by another. The victim starts to internalize the blame. They start to believe that they are the problem. They start to rearrange their entire understanding of reality to accommodate the abuser's narrative. And that's exactly what was happening to Grace. At 6 months pregnant, Grace discovered something. She found text messages on James's phone. She wasn't snooping intentionally. The phone was on the kitchen counter. A message came through from someone named M. It said, "Can't wait to see you tonight." Same place. Grace's hands shook as she read it. She read more messages. There were dozens of them. Flirtatious. Sexual. Explicit in some cases. M was clearly someone James was seeing. Someone he was intimate with. Grace did something she rarely did. She exploded. She screamed. She cried. She demanded answers. And James, caught red-handed, did what manipulators do. He turned it around. He accused her of violating his privacy. He told her that her hormones were making her crazy. He told her that the messages meant nothing. He told her that she was being dramatic and hysterical. He told her that she was overreacting because she was pregnant and emotional. If you wouldn't be so focused on yourself and your body and your pregnancy, maybe I wouldn't need to look elsewhere, he said. Somehow, her pain became her fault. Somehow, his betrayal was her responsibility. She felt ashamed. She felt like she had driven him to cheat. And because she was pregnant, because she was vulnerable, because she was carrying his child, she accepted his apology. He promised it wouldn't happen again. He promised he was getting counseling. He promised he loved her. And she believed him. Because by this point, she had forgotten what a healthy relationship looked like. She had forgotten that love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. She had forgotten that she deserved better. In February 2019, Grace was in labor with twins. The pregnancy had progressed to unexpected twins, 2 girls instead of 1 baby. The doctors said everything looked healthy. The labor was long. It lasted 18 hours. She pushed through the pain, thinking about the future, thinking about holding her babies, thinking about the life that was about to begin. James was in the room, but he was distant. He looked at his phone more than he looked at her. When the twins were born, 2 beautiful girls, Emma and Olivia, he held them briefly, took some photos for social media, and then said he needed to go make calls. He was already planning. He was already executing the next phase of his plan. The first few weeks after the twins were born were chaos. Grace was healing from a difficult labor. She was sleep-deprived. She was hormonal. She was trying to learn how to care for 2 newborns simultaneously. Emma cried constantly. Olivia had acid reflux and struggled to feed. Grace was running on no sleep, functioning on pure adrenaline and desperation. She called her mother. She called her brothers. She begged for help, and they came. They helped her with the babies. They helped her with the house. They could all see something was wrong with James. They could see how distant he was, how dismissive he was of Grace's struggles. Her brother Michael pulled James aside one day and said, "You need to step up. Your wife just gave birth to twins. She needs you." James's response was cold. "She needs to figure it out. I didn't ask for this." Within weeks, James started spending even more time away from home. He would leave in the morning and not come back until late at night. When he was home, he would retreat to the bedroom or the living room with his laptop. He wouldn't help with the babies. He wouldn't comfort Grace when she was overwhelmed. He would criticize everything. "The house is a mess," he'd say, even though Grace was barely able to shower. "You're not taking care of yourself," he'd say, even though she was operating on 2 hours of sleep. "Your body is disgusting," he said once, when she was still in the postpartum recovery period. These words weren't casual cruelty. They were calculated. They were designed to make her feel worthless. They were designed to break her down. And they worked. By April 2019, Grace was showing signs of postpartum depression. She was struggling to bond with her babies, which made her feel like a failure as a mother. She was having intrusive thoughts. She was crying constantly. She wasn't eating properly. But every time she tried to talk to James about how she was feeling, he would minimize it. "Everyone has babies," he'd say. "Everyone finds it hard. You're being dramatic." He wouldn't take her mental health seriously. He wouldn't support her. He would make her feel like her depression was a personal weakness rather than a medical condition. And during this time, while Grace was at her most vulnerable, while she was struggling mentally and physically, that's when James made his final move. That's when he decided it was time to execute the plan that had been forming in his mind since the moment he first saw her. He came home one evening in late April. The twins were asleep. Grace was sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, her body and mind completely exhausted. He stood in front of her and said, "I'm leaving." Just like that. No apology. No explanation. No attempt at reconciliation. Just 4 words that would change everything. Grace thought she misheard him. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'm leaving," he repeated. "I don't want this anymore. I don't want you. I don't want the babies. I'm taking my things, and I'm leaving." Grace started crying. She begged him to go to counseling. She begged him to try. She asked what she had done wrong. And he looked at her with an expression of pure contempt and said, "You've done nothing. You never existed. You were just someone to pass time with until I found something better." Grace asked him where he would live. He said he had already made arrangements. She asked if he would help with the babies. He said no. She asked if he would pay child support. He said maybe, but probably not. And then he went upstairs, packed some clothes, and came back down with a suitcase. Before he left, he said one more thing. "By the way, I want you out of the house. I'm keeping it. Find somewhere else to live." Grace was shocked. "You can't do that," she said. "This is my house. My name is on the deed." James smiled. It was a cruel smile. "Your name is on the deed, but I've talked to a lawyer. We're married. In Pennsylvania, this is considered a marital asset. When we divorce, we'll have to split everything 50-50. But first, you need to understand who has power in this situation. And it's not you. Get out." Grace had 72 hours to leave the house. James told her that if she didn't, He would call the police and claim she was trespassing. She called a lawyer immediately. The lawyer she reached was different from her father's lawyer. This was a younger woman named Patricia Morrison who specialized in family law. Patricia was blunt. He's bluffing about some things, but he's right about marital property in Pennsylvania. Since the house was purchased before your marriage and your father put it in a trust, it should remain your separate property. But proving that while he's claiming marital asset rights is going to require documentation. Do you have the trust documents? Grace had them. Her father's lawyer had given her copies when her father died. She had them in a box in a closet. Patricia asked to see them immediately. Grace gathered everything she could find. Trust documents. The deed showing her name. Her father's will. The lawyer's letters explaining the trust structure. Patricia reviewed everything carefully. Okay, she said. This is actually very clear. Your father set this up specifically to protect this property from being considered a marital asset. The trust is irrevocable. The deed is in your name, held in trust. He cannot claim rights to this house. You don't have to leave. Grace felt a moment of relief. But Patricia continued. However, I should tell you that he can still make life very difficult for you. He can claim marital property rights anyway. He can file court motions. He can argue that the house should be considered marital property because you both live there. He can try to tie you up in court battles for years. And during that time, you'll be paying legal fees. Grace asked how much that would cost. Patricia said it could easily exceed $20,000, possibly much more. Grace had about $15,000 in savings. That was it. That was all the money she had in the world. And if she spent it on legal fees, she would have nothing left to buy diapers. Nothing left to buy formula. Nothing left to survive. She asked Patricia what her options were. Patricia said, you have two choices. You can fight this legally and prove that the house is yours. Or you can negotiate with him. Offer him money to drop his claim. It might be cheaper in the long run. Grace had to think about her daughters. She had to think about survival. And so, despite Patricia's advice that she didn't need to leave, despite knowing the law was on her side, Grace decided to pack her things. She couldn't afford the legal battle. She couldn't afford to risk losing the house if she lost in court. And she was too broken, too exhausted, too depressed to fight. She called her mother. She said, I need to leave. I need to get out. Her mother didn't understand. But it's your house. He can't make you leave. Grace explained everything. She explained about the marital property laws. She explained about the legal fees. She explained about how she couldn't afford to fight. She explained about how she just needed to get away from him, away from the pain, away from the humiliation. Her mother helped her pack. Grace took her clothes. She took photographs. She took some of her father's things, a watch, a book, a sweater that still smelled like him. But she had to leave most of her furniture because she couldn't fit it in her mother's car. She had to leave her kitchen supplies, her decorations, her life. She left the house that her father had given her. The house that was supposed to be her security. The house that was supposed to keep her safe. On the afternoon of May 3, 2019, Grace pulled away from her home with 2 newborn babies in the back seat and $72 in her purse. It was raining. The wipers were squeaking. Emma and Olivia were crying because they could sense her distress. And Grace drove to her mother's house, which was already crowded with her mother's other children and their families. She would sleep on a couch for the first night. Within a week, she would run out of places to stay. Within 2 weeks, she would be sleeping in her car. Grace spent 3 weeks homeless with her twins. She showered at her friends' houses. She did laundry at her mother's. She held her babies in the back seat of her car while they slept, praying that no police officer would knock on the window and charge her with child abandonment. She applied for emergency assistance. She applied for every government program that existed. The waiting lists were long. The processes were slow. And in the meantime, she was barely surviving. She was functioning on pure survival instinct. Every morning, she would wake up not knowing how she was going to feed her babies. Every night, she would sit in the car and wonder if this was it. If this was how her life would be. If she would ever recover from this. It was her mother who told her to call her father's lawyer. Michael, her mother said. Grace's father wanted her to be protected. Maybe there's something else he left for her. Some money, something. Grace didn't think it would matter, but she made the call. She sat in her car, outside a Target where she had been sitting for 2 hours to use the Wi-Fi, and she called the law office of Michael Chun, the attorney who had handled her father's estate. His secretary scheduled an appointment for 3 days later. Grace went to that appointment disheveled, carrying both babies because she couldn't afford a sitter. Michael Chun, now in his 70s, took one look at her, and his heart broke. He had known her father. He had known Grace since she was a teenager. He could see the devastation in her face. Grace told him everything. She told him about James. She told him about being thrown out. She told him about the legal battle she couldn't afford. She told him about sleeping in her car. And Michael listened carefully. When she finished, he stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick folder. "Grace," he said, "your father had more foresight than I think you understand." He opened the folder. Inside were documents that Grace had never seen. Documents that her father had prepared, but that Michael had held on to for this exact reason. Her father had written a letter, sealed with instructions to Michael that it only be opened if Grace was ever in legal or financial distress. The letter read, "To my beloved daughter, Grace. If you're reading this, it means you're facing a situation that is overwhelming you. Perhaps a divorce. Perhaps a betrayal. Perhaps someone you trusted has hurt you. I always feared this. I always knew that someone might try to take advantage of your goodness. That's why I set everything up the way I did. The house is yours. It is protected, but I wanted to give you something more. Something that would ensure you would never be completely without resources. I have set aside a trust account for you. It contains $250,000. It is in a separate trust that cannot be touched by creditors or during a divorce. It was established before your marriage and remains yours alone. Michael will explain everything to you. I love you, Dad." Grace read the letter 3 times before she understood what it meant. Her father had given her money, $250,000. It had been there the whole time, waiting for exactly this moment. Her father, with his foresight and his legal knowledge, had protected her in a way she never even knew. She broke down in tears. Michael held her hand. He explained that the money was real. It was accessible. It had been accumulating interest for years. It was hers. And suddenly, the situation changed. She could afford a lawyer. She could afford to fight. She could afford to live. Her father had reached from beyond the grave and saved her. But the house was still her biggest concern. She asked Michael about the trust structure again. She asked him to explain in detail how her father had protected the property. Michael explained that the trust was irrevocable. The deed was in her name as trustee. The property was not considered marital property because it had been established before the marriage and was inherited, not acquired during the marriage. James had no legal claim. None. He had lied to her. He had bluffed her into leaving. And now, with the money her father left her, she could prove it. With the help of Patricia Morrison, the family lawyer, and with the documentation that her father had so carefully preserved, Grace could go to war. And she was going to win.